Thank you all so much, and I just have to say, and as I said it to Caitlin, thank you for that beautiful introduction. It was so unfair because I was determined not to get choked up in this speech, and I'm starting it choked up, so there you go. That's life. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the BCFED Convention 2018. I am so excited to be here with you, spending a whole week with union activists from all over the province, debating resolutions, making decisions that will guide the future of the BCFED. We'll be hearing from leaders and activists from all over the country. We're going to talk about making life better for the workers of the province. As you know, I will not be seeking another term as president of the Fed. It was not an easy decision, but I made that decision knowing that the labor movement in this province is in good shape. We are strong, we are united, we are focused on advocating for workers. We've seen some amazing progress in the last couple of years. We have a path to a $15 minimum wage. We are getting rid of the discriminatory server wage. We are on our way to $10 a day childcare. We are going to have community benefits agreements. We are eliminating MSP premiums, and we are establishing a registry for temporary foreign workers. And that is just the beginning. That is just the beginning. We are in a time of incredible opportunities. It's a good time to pass the torch. Finally, after 16 years of an anti-union, anti-worker government, we have the chance to level the playing field, to make real and significant gains for working people. I know that all of you will make that happen, and I will be cheering you on. Times of major change in our lives are times of reflection, and I confess I've been doing some of that. As you know, and some of you tease me about, I'm a teacher, and I spent many years teaching in the public school system. Yes, and kudos to my brothers and sisters and friends in the BCTF. If you put my reflections on my time as a leader together with my teaching background, you might be able to guess where this speech is going to go. It's my opportunity to share with you the lessons that I have learned in my time as an activist and leader. And I have to confess, I won't be able to resist throwing in a bit of advice. So here are my lessons. Lesson number one, we will only build a stronger movement if we take every opportunity to draw in new people. And that led me to think about my own engagement in the labor movement. I know I'm like many others in this room. In my early years as a teacher, I had an experience that made me think deeply and profoundly about fairness and justice in the workplace. I witnessed an appalling and unacceptable injustice as a young teacher in Abbotsford in 1983. Some of you will remember 1983, those of my generation anyway. The social credit government brought in a devastating restraint budget that led to massive cuts in the public sector and the layoff of teachers. I was a new teacher in that district, and I fully expected to get laid off, but I didn't. A teacher with 32 years of service got a layoff notice. It was an absolutely devastating blow to that teacher, who, like all teachers, went far above and beyond regular work hours in his service to kids. I gained an immediate understanding of the importance of our collective fight for justice and fairness for all workers. That experience instilled in me a lifelong commitment to unions and the labor movement, and became the underpinning of my decisions as a leader. And I'm often asked about my path to leadership, particularly at schools and courses designed to promote women becoming leaders. The answer to that question takes me back to the staff room at McGee Secondary in the early 90s. We needed a rep for the Status of Women Committee and a rep for the Bargaining Committee. I had two young children at the time, but I felt like I had to give back to my union. And so I volunteered. And that was it. I raised my hand in a staff room, and I got sucked into the vortex of union activism, and I never got out. And after that, I confess that pretty much every significant leadership role I have undertaken, I took on that role because someone talked me into it. Someone came to me and said, Irene, you have to do this. People always had a good reason why I had to apply to be chief negotiator or run for some position. My leadership path was really a series of situations in which I said yes to people who asked me to do something. And so here are my lessons for you from that story. Say yes when you can. We need the highest level of engagement we can possibly have to keep our democratic labor movement strong and vibrant. Identify talented people, mentor them, and ask them to do things. If they heard point number one, they'll say yes. And when they say yes, do everything you can to support them. This is the way we build our unions and our movement, by drawing in as many people as we can and supporting them in the work they do, in the work we do together. And finally, make space. Make space for people. Remember, sometimes people won't or can't step up until we get out of the way. And that leads to my next lesson. And my next lesson is an old one in the union movement. We have to organize, organize, organize. Organizing, yes. Organizing is critical to building the movement. Indeed, it is the only way we will survive. We have to organize more people into unions because unions are the key to increasing equality. And here it comes, Caitlin, unions are a poverty reduction strategy. Drink the water. Unions make the world a better, more equal, more just place, and we can never forget that. That has to sustain us in the long days, the busy weeks, the many evenings and weekends we all put into this work. We have to organize around our campaigns for a $15 minimum wage, for living wages, for paid sick leave for all workers, for childcare, for healthy and safe workplaces, and employer accountability when workers get killed or injured on the job. We have to organize the left because we are not alone. Progressive forces need to work together and stick together. Coalitions are tough. I've been part of many of them. We don't always agree, and it's hard to keep people working together. But it's so important to set aside our differences, find our common ground, and fight for the things we believe in, the things we know will make life better for all workers in BC. And my next lesson is in that organizing, in all those campaigns, we have to dream big. We have to fight for what workers deserve because they do deserve it. When we started the $15 minimum wage campaign, it was almost 5 years ago. We launched it 4 years ago, but we really started the campaign almost 5 years ago. The minimum wage at the time was $10.25. A $15 minimum wage was a 46% increase. It seems crazy now, but many argued that 15 was too high, that we should be more reasonable. No one had promised a $15 minimum wage. People argued that it should be $13.50 or $14, like the Ontario campaign at the time. But thank you to the young workers, because the young workers said no. It has to be 15, and we agreed. And when we did the calculations, the $15 minimum wage got you just above the poverty line, so it definitely was not too much to ask. And it gave us the winning argument in the campaign, and that was that if you work full-time, you should have a wage that lifts you above the poverty line. And thank goodness we did dream big, because not too long after that, the Alberta NDP committed to 15 in their election campaign, and Seattle went to a $15 minimum wage, and eventually so did Ontario. We won't talk about where they're going now, but they did commit to a $15 minimum wage. And now 15 seems too low because it is too low. Workers deserve living wages. And we're going to keep up the fight for that, but on the way, we're going to get to our goal of a $15 minimum wage. Too slowly, as I constantly remind the Premier and the Labour Minister, too slowly, but we're going to get there. And this is my opportunity to thank you, because we, the workers and union activists and labour unions in this province, we did this together. Go ahead and give yourselves a round of applause. We built a broad and deep coalition in the progressive community, a coalition of anti-poverty and human rights groups and civil society organizations. We canvassed at SkyTrain stations and bus stops. We got petitions signed. We laid the groundwork that allowed the NDP to commit to a $15 minimum wage in their platform and then implement it when they got elected. And when we get to 15, hundreds of thousands of workers will be lifted above the poverty line because the labor movement fought for them. We did that, and we did it together. Thank you for that. But we didn't get there just because we worked hard. We did work hard, and that helped. But we got there because we elected a government that shares our values. We would not have a path to 15 without an NDP government. And we will not get to living wages unless we continue to elect progressive governments. Now we need to dream big on some other issues, like other employment standards that need improving. Things like paid sick leave for all and leave for victims of domestic and intimate partner violence. We need to restore fairness and balance to the Labour Code so we can improve the ability to organize and ensure fair collective bargaining. Because thanks to us, thanks to the labour movement, the right to join a union and bargain collectively are rights protected by the Charter. We need to get rid of the ability to unfairly flip contracts to allow employers to drive down wages and benefits and force unions to organize over and over and over again. Thanks to the NDP, we've taken a giant step in that direction with the repeal of Bills 29 and 94. Those two bills were some of the nastiest pieces of anti-worker legislation we have seen come out of any government. The result was massive privatization in healthcare and the firing of 10,000 workers, mostly women of color. Terrible legislation, and it's now gone, and we're going to insist on guaranteed successorship provisions in the Labour Code. And we desperately need to fix the apprenticeship system so that we train the next generation of workers who will build the infrastructure we need. We need a return to compulsory trades so we can have confidence. Let's give that a round of applause, too. We need to return to compulsory trades because we need to have confidence that the important work of building this province is being done safely by well-trained workers. And thanks to the introduction of community benefits agreements, public projects will be built by union workers with good wages and benefits. They will employ local workers and will help us open the doors to those good jobs in the trades to more women, to First Nations workers, to persons with disabilities, to workers who traditionally have not had access to those jobs. And I want to give a shout out to tradeswomen in this province. I've seen a few of you around here. Yes. Women in the trades in this province have been determined and persistent in their advocacy for increasing the number of women in the trades. And they have been a central force in establishing the BC Centre for Women in the Trades, a project that we are very proud to co-sponsor as the BCFED. We're very excited about the work being done by the 2 organizers that have been hired. You can visit them out in the display area here. They're working hard on mentorship and networking, shifting the culture on construction work sites, and helping women find employment in the trades. Kudos to them, and that's such a great project. We're very excited about it. All of these things are possible because in May of 2017, we elected an NDP government, a government that values the work that we do as workers and has respect for unions and the labor movement. And that leads to my next lesson. Governments matter. When I was a teacher, sometimes people would say to me, Irene, you are too political. Or sometimes they talked about my union. The BCTF is too political. Yes. I really didn't get that statement because in my view, there is no such thing as being too political. No such thing. No such thing. Now, to be sure, there can be nastiness sometimes in politics, and that's wrong. But we need to be guided by fundamental values of integrity and honesty and transparency. But we must never confuse bad behavior in politics with legitimate, positive political engagement. Political engagement is good, it is essential, and it matters at so many levels. Governments make decisions. They make decisions in communities, in regions, in our province and our country, and across the globe. And at every one of those levels, government decisions have an impact on every aspect of our lives and the lives of the people we love. High-quality public services, good union jobs, the safety of workers, the quality of the water we drink, the food we eat, and the air we breathe. All of these things, and pretty much everything else in our lives, is influenced by decisions governments make. We have a right, indeed we have a serious responsibility to engage in politics at every level and to elect governments that share our values because good government matters. And we will have better governments, more representative governments, more cooperative governments under a system of proportional representation. Is there anybody out there who has not mailed in their ballot? If so, go do it right now. You are excused from the rest of my speech. Because this is our best chance to get governments that more fairly reflect the wishes of the citizens of the province. We need good governments to achieve our goals. We will never have the world we want unless we engage in political action. And that political engagement includes our unions, being active, being committed to good decision-making and good leadership, and working hard to ensure our unions stay strong and vibrant. Your members depend on that. We depend on that in the labor movement. We can never have a strong BCFED without strong unions. So, put as much time, energy, and passion as you can muster into political engagement in as many areas as you can fit into your already busy lives, because there is no such thing as being too political. Politics is the way we fight for our rights and a better world. And that leads to my next lesson, and that is about our most fundamental right. Our most fundamental right is to go home healthy and safe at the end of the day. We work hard. We work hard fighting for workers' rights, but none of those rights matter if you're killed on the job. We all have the right to be healthy and safe at work, to go home at the end of our workday. And the fight is by no means over. Hundreds of workers are seriously injured or die every year. And we cannot rest until we are doing every single thing we can to prevent injuries and deaths on the job. And when the worst happens and a worker does get injured on the job, that worker must be fairly compensated. That is the historic compromise we made, and it has to be honored. It is not being honored thanks to the changes the Liberal government made. So we have work to do. We're not giving up until we see changes at the changes to the Workers' Compensation Act and regulations that ensure we are doing everything we can to prevent injuries and deaths on the job, and that workers who are injured have access to full compensation and rehabilitation. Because being healthy and safe at work is our most basic right. But of course, there are many other rights we need to fight for, including human rights. And that leads to my next lesson or reflection. We are not doing a good job on diversity. We're not doing enough to increase access and opportunities for women, for persons with disabilities, for workers of colors, for LGBTQ workers, for Aboriginal peoples, for all equity-seeking groups. Let's face it, we have not broken the glass ceiling. We have barely cracked it. We need to do a better job on diversity, on being welcoming and inclusive in our unions, and on having inclusive workplaces, and on having our leadership reflect our membership. I was the first woman to become president of the BCFED. It was big news. I got interviewed many times on that topic, and I was asked if it was significant, which I thought was kind of an odd question, frankly, but and I answered that question. I talked about the significance. I talked about role modeling. I talked about the difference in perspective that women bring to leadership roles. But in all those interviews, no one asked the real question, the important question, the question we really need to think about. And that question is, why did it take so long? Why did it take so long to elect a woman to the leadership of a progressive movement? And there are a lot of complicated answers to that question, but fundamentally it took so long because there are systematic barriers in place that hinder the progress of equity-seeking groups. And we need to analyze those barriers and work on breaking them down, so that our movement and our leadership reflects our membership and our province. If we truly want to represent workers and build the strongest, most powerful movement possible, we need to do a better job on diversity and inclusion. And to build that powerful movement, we need to understand where our power comes from. And that leads to my next lesson, and that is that we have power. We have power as workers, and we should not be afraid to use that power. And that power is in our numbers. There is always more of us than there is of them. More workers than managers. More workers than CEOs. More workers than right-wing political leaders determined to take our rights away. We need to remember that we have the power of the collective, and we need to use that power to make gains for workers. And let's be clear, as workers, we don't make gains because the boss decides to give us things. We have to fight for everything we get. The employer did not give us an 8-hour day willingly, or a 5-day work week, or decent wages, benefits, or health and safety regulations. We fought for everything we have, and we have to fight to keep the working conditions we have and improve them. Yes, we need to be strategic. We need to plan and, of course, to organize, but we cannot be afraid to be bold, to take risks, to exercise our power and go down paths sometimes without knowing exactly how things will end. And that leads to my next lesson. We have to be bold because we have big problems to solve. We face two enormous global problems. One is poverty and inequality, and the other is climate change. And we cannot and will not solve those problems separately. We have to be a central and committed force in solving both those problems, solving them together with others who share our values and commitment to solutions. And we've been actively engaged in that through our coalition with the environmental movement in Green Jobs BC. In that coalition, we work on the principle that as we adopt policies and practices to produce a greener, cleaner planet, we also have to create good, sustainable, family-supporting jobs. We have to think about the impact of climate change on workers and their jobs. Some workers will see their jobs eliminated or changed because of climate change. Those workers must experience a just transition as we tackle one of the most pressing global problems we face. The greatest of our global problems is poverty and inequality. And in this province, we allow 1 in 5 children to grow up in poverty. We cannot call ourselves a progressive movement unless we demand immediate and concentrated action to change that. The government's poverty reduction targets and plan will help. The $15 minimum wage will help. Higher union density will help. Just transition plans will help. But we cannot rest until we engage every possible strategy to reduce inequality, until no child grows up in poverty and no one lives in poverty in this province. And that leads to my next lesson, and that is, these are big problems. We can't solve them alone. We need a big tent. We need to build a big movement. The BCFED represents the unions in this province, and our first and primary responsibility is to the members of those unions, to get more people into unions, to organize, organize, organize. But the lessons of history show us that the labor movement thrives and grows when we see ourselves as part of the larger fight for equality and justice, and when we are centrally involved and engaged in the social movements of our time. I'm very proud of the culture at the Fed. We have a Fed for all workers, not just union members. And that must continue for 2 reasons. One, it's the right thing to do, because the workers of the province need us. We are their voice, and we need a bigger, broader group of people to work with us on tackling the enormous challenges we face. The second reason we need a big tent is that it helps us too. The labor movement grows and union density increases when we are part of the larger movements for progressive change. We must be a labor movement that cares about justice and fairness, a movement that cares about everyone and seeks dignity and equality for the most vulnerable among us. That has to be our central value as a labor movement. My last lesson is about relationships, because one of the things I've learned about all the work we do together is that relationships matter. I'm reminded of the words of Barb Byers, longtime Secretary-Treasurer of the CLC. Barb used to say, "Don't mistake kindness and compassion for weakness." We should be as kind and compassionate as we can be with each other. We will have many animated, passionate debates, some of them on this floor, I hope. That's part of democracy, and we should not shy away from those difficult conversations. But we can always treat each other with respect, and we can all afford, including me, to be kinder and more compassionate with each other. And finally, I want to say that it has been a pleasure to serve as the President of the Federation of Labor. I will not lie and say that I have loved every minute. I can think of a few people who gave me opportunities for growth. No names, no names. But I have truly loved being the voice of workers in this province. I have truly loved that. It has been an honor. The Fed is an umbrella organization, a kind of fascinating conglomeration of unions of all sizes and quite different cultures. And it makes our politics complicated sometimes. But in my years at the Fed, it has become so clear to me that it is our values that unite us. And our values can be summarized in one word: solidarity. We are stronger together. We need to act collectively in our struggle as workers. We need to support each other, especially the most vulnerable among us. And we will never, ever achieve anything if we don't remember those values and stick together. Thank you so much for being comrades in that struggle. Let's have a great convention.